His story begins with the arrival of Rick Voltrax, a new student at Luna's school. He walks into the classroom, and everything seems normal at first. He's dressed in a regular school uniform, and the other students don't think much of him, but Luna notices something strange right away. He's just different. There's an aura of awkward confidence about him, the kind of confidence you see in someone who knows they're not quite part of the world they've been thrown into. Rick introduces himself with a loud, overly enthusiastic, "Hi, I'm Rick Voltrax, just transferred here from, well, somewhere far, far away." His voice echoes in a way that almost sounds too mechanical for a human, but no one seems to notice except Luna. She raises an eyebrow, but doesn't say anything, figuring it's probably just a weird first day introduction. He's seated next to Luna, and for the next few minutes, everything seems relatively normal, but that quickly fades as Rick starts talking. As the teacher hands out some assignments, Rick leans toward Luna and asks, "So, what are the fundamental differences between the fabric of space-time and the nature of black holes? I've been reading about it in intergalactic studies, and I think it's key to understanding how we can control the warp drives." Luna stares at him, her mind racing. Black holes, warp drives. She's just trying to focus on her math homework, and now she has this kid next to her talking about intergalactic technology. Not only is he off topic, but there's no way a new student would come into class talking about black holes in such a casual manner. Luna sighs and mutters to herself, "What's with this guy?" A few minutes later, the teacher starts going over simple math problems, asking the class questions like, "What's 2 plus 2?" It's elementary stuff, the kind of questions Luna can answer with her eyes closed. When Rick is called on, though, he looks up with wide, eager eyes, as if he's just been handed a very important mission. "Oh, that's a great question," he exclaims, his hands dramatically raised like he's about to launch into some kind of speech. "Well, 2 plus 2 is, of course, not just 4, Rick begins, much to the confusion of the class. "See, if you consider time travel as a component of addition, 2 plus 2 becomes an exponential loop of possibilities. The answer is forever fluctuating, depending on the dimension you're operating in. Time, my friends, is the true sum of the equation." Luna watches him with a completely blank stare, her pencil frozen mid-air. The teacher looks equally baffled, staring at Rick, his mouth hanging open. The rest of the class sits in silence, unsure of what just happened. Rick, oblivious to the confusion he's caused, smiles and looks around, clearly expecting some kind of positive reinforcement. But all he gets is a room full of puzzled faces. Luna tries to hide her smirk, but she can't help it. She whispers under her breath, "I'm pretty sure time travel wasn't on the math syllabus." The bell rings, and everyone stands up to leave for lunch. Luna heads toward the door, but Rick suddenly appears next to her. "Hey, Luna. You wouldn't happen to have any knowledge about gravitational waves and their effects on human biology, would you? I've been meaning to learn about that." Luna blinks, not sure if he's serious. Well, not really. I just know that gravity, kind of keeps us from floating away." Rick tilts his head, clearly pondering this answer for a few seconds. "Interesting. I must have been wrong about gravity's potential," he says, tapping his chin like he's just solved an important equation. "Well, maybe you can help me with something else. I was wondering if you had any information on the latest black hole technology. I'd love to discuss it over lunch. Maybe you can explain how humans make sushi. It's a bizarrely complex process, considering the interdimensional properties involved in rice rolling." At this point, Luna is increasingly convinced that Rick is not just a weird kid, he's something else entirely. He's too strange, too incredibly out of place in a world that's supposed to be grounded in reality. She doesn't want to get involved with his space-time theories, but she can't help herself. Rick is suspicious, and Luna's curiosity is piqued. She gives him a half smile, deciding to have a little fun with him. Sushi. Who? Sure. Maybe we can go to the cafeteria and I'll teach you how to make one. If you can explain how you know so much about black holes and time travel, deal. Rick's face lights up and he excitedly shakes her hand. Deal. I've been meaning to ask someone, but I wasn't sure if I was allowed to talk about the non-human tech in a public space. Can't be too careful with these things, you know? Anyway, I'm so excited to learn from you, Luna. Luna nods as she walks to lunch, but in the back of her mind, she's beginning to piece things together. Something's off about Rick. There's no way he's just some weird new kid. His lack of understanding about basic human behavior, combined with his talk of alien tech and space-time anomalies, is making her think that Rick might actually be something much stranger than she first thought. And as she sits down at lunch with him, her suspicion grows. Rick isn't just a new student, he's an alien. She wonders how long it will take before Rick figures out that Luna already knows. As the days go by, Rick continues to demonstrate increasingly strange behaviors that only confirm Luna's suspicions about him being something other than human. It starts out small. He's always talking about things no one else seems to understand: black holes, time travel, and parallel dimensions. But it's the little things that really begin to stand out. One day, during art class, the teacher asks everyone to draw something simple. Let's try drawing a loaf of bread, she says, walking around the classroom, watching as the students begin to sketch. Luna is half listening, doodling her own bread, but she can't help but glance over at Rick as he starts to draw. He doesn't pick up his pencil the way the other students do. Instead, he stares at the paper for a moment, then carefully starts to draw lines that twist and turn in strange, almost unnatural ways. Rick's pencil moves in slow, deliberate strokes as a lumpy shape starts to take form. Luna can't help but lean in for a better look. The drawing is odd. It's not a loaf of bread at all. Instead, it's a grotesque creature with tentacles and a faint, almost glowing, interdimensional aura surrounding it. The shape writhes on the page like it could crawl out at any moment. Luna raises an eyebrow. Rick, what is that? Rick doesn't even look up, still focused on his creation. It's an ancient form of bread from the Zalathor system. It's actually a portal to a whole new dimension. But you have to knead it with the right energy pulses, or it could get dangerous. Luna stares at him, mouth slightly open. Bread from another dimension. She repeats, not entirely sure if he's joking. But the more she looks at it, the more convinced she becomes. He's serious. The teacher walks by, glancing at Rick's drawing. Her face freezes for a second, trying to comprehend what she's seeing, before giving a quick, nervous smile. Interesting interpretation, Rick. Maybe let's just stick to bread for now, okay? Later that day, the class moves to lunch. As Luna makes her way to the cafeteria, she notices Rick sitting at a table by himself. He's fiddling with his lunch tray, and Luna can't help but notice something strange. Instead of just eating his food like a normal person, Rick has started rearranging the items on his tray. He takes the mashed potatoes and squeezes them together into a perfect cube. He then mixes the salad with what appears to be a sparkling powder he brought with him. The whole thing looks like a science experiment gone horribly wrong. Luna can barely contain her laughter as she watches. Rick is so serious, so focused on this weird food experiment of his, like he's conducting some kind of alien ritual. She's half expecting him to pull out a laser beam and start analyzing the food under a microscope. But instead, he takes the cube of mashed potatoes and presses it together like he's trying to reshape space. With a slight humming sound, the cube starts to flicker. One moment, it's solid. The next moment, it's almost like the entire meal begins to disappear. Luna watches in awe as the mashed potatoes slowly disintegrate into nothingness, like the food is being absorbed into a black hole. The rest of the tray follows suit, and soon there's nothing left on Rick's plate but a faint glow and a small ripple in the air. Luna can't hold it in anymore. She bursts out laughing, earning some odd stares from the other students. "Rick, are you trying to turn your lunch into a black hole?" she jokes, barely able to catch her breath from the laughter. Rick looks up at her, clearly confused. "Well, technically, yes," he says, adjusting his glasses. "I was testing the food's molecular integrity by applying interdimensional compressions. It's much more efficient than using a microwave." Luna's face contorts into a mix of amusement and disbelief. "Of course it is. Just don't accidentally create a wormhole that swallows the cafeteria." Rick seems to consider her suggestion for a moment before nodding. "I'll be careful," he says, seriously. "The last time I used compression on something, I created a mini black hole in the school's chemistry lab. It was extremely difficult to explain to the janitor." After that, Luna decides to have a little fun with Rick. He's so eager to learn, but it's clear he has no grasp of basic human concepts. She begins testing him, setting up simple tasks to see how he reacts. "Okay, Rick," she says, pulling out a piece of paper. "I need you to write your name. Just your name. Nothing fancy." Rick tilts his head, looking at the paper like it's a mysterious object. He fumbles with the pen for a moment, then starts to write. But instead of just writing his name, he begins scribbling patterns that don't even resemble letters. "What is that?" Luna asks, trying not to laugh. "I asked you to write Rick." Rick looks at the paper, confused. "I'm not sure what you mean. This is the alien script of my people. It's much more efficient than your Earth-based alphabet. Each symbol represents a concept, not just a letter." "It's far more," Luna interrupts him, holding up her hand. "Right, okay, Rick. Let's stick to something a little more human, yeah." As the day progresses, Luna becomes increasingly entertained by Rick's complete inability to grasp basic human norms. He might be a hyper-intelligent alien, but he's about as good at fitting in as a fish on land. Luna, at this point, is starting to realize that she might be the only one who knows what Rick really is. And while Rick continues to alienate everyone around him with his strange behaviors, Luna begins to get more and more suspicious. There's something deeper going on here. Rick isn't just a weird new kid, he's something far more interesting. Luna was starting to enjoy herself a little too much. Rick's alien-like behavior was baffling, but also hilarious. Every day, he managed to do something so absurd that it was becoming impossible to ignore. So, Luna decided it was time to have a little more fun. She had figured out by now that Rick was more than just a socially awkward kid. He was an alien, and that meant she could easily take advantage of his cluelessness. She started by testing his limits, asking him the most ridiculous questions she could think of. After all, if he didn't understand basic human concepts, he was bound to slip up eventually, and Luna was going to make sure she was there to witness it. "So Rick," Luna began one day, looking up from her notebook with a mischievous glint in her eyes, "how do humans, make friends?" Rick looked up at her, his face lighting up as if she had just asked him about the meaning of life. "Ah, friendship. That's an easy one. He clapped his hands together. In my home world, we build intergalactic bridges to form emotional connections. These bridges are made of stardust and light frequencies. They emit a soft hum that helps people bond. It's very effective, but it requires a careful balance of quantum resonance. Luna blinked, trying not to laugh out loud. Wait, what? She said, completely deadpan. Stardust and light frequencies. You mean, like a giant space hug? Rick nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Cosmic hugs are the best way to bond. They convey trust, friendship, and mutual understanding. It's quite powerful once you experience it. Luna leaned back in her chair, barely able to contain her grin. She had to admit, this was too good. Right, so how do you make friends with regular people on Earth? You know, without using your interdimensional bridges. Rick paused, as if considering the question with the weight of a galaxy on his shoulders. Well, humans must be able to communicate through light and sound waves. We can share emotional wavelengths. For instance, when you say hello, you're transmitting your emotional signal to the other person. It's like a handshake in a different dimension. Luna raised an eyebrow. A handshake in a different dimension. So, how do we shake hands, then? Rick rubbed his chin, looking extremely serious, as if he was about to solve a great mystery. Ah, of course, the galactic handshake. Humans have a tradition where they clasp their hands together, apply pressure, and exchange energy through their palms. The more energetic the shake, the stronger the bond. Luna couldn't help it. She burst out laughing. Rick's explanation was so ridiculous that she couldn't hold back. Wow, Rick, she said, wiping tears from her eyes. I had no idea it was that complicated to make friends. Maybe you should try it out in the lunch line. I'm sure they'd love a galactic handshake. Rick looked at her with a genuine look of interest. You're right, Luna. I need to practice making Earth-based friendships. A handshake should be a good start. The next day at lunch, Luna watched from a distance as Rick stood in line behind a few students. He seemed focused, like he was about to perform some ritualistic cosmic ritual. Luna could barely contain her excitement at what was about to unfold. Rick had no idea what he was walking into. Rick tapped the first student on the shoulder. Greetings, fellow human, he said with a bright smile, holding out his hand. I am Rick Valtrax. Let us now form a connection through the galactic handshake. The student stared at him, blinking a few times, clearly confused. What? The student glanced nervously around, but Rick wasn't giving up. He continued to hold out his hand, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. I assure you, this is the way to bond, friend. I come from a place beyond your understanding, and this handshake will create a cosmic link between us. The student hesitated for a moment before shaking Rick's hand, but as soon as their hands made contact, something strange happened. There was a sudden burst of light from Rick's hand, and a high-pitched sound rang out so high that Luna could feel her teeth rattle from the vibrations. She blinked, wondering if Rick's handshake had somehow triggered a small cosmic explosion. But that wasn't all. As soon as the student shook Rick's hand, the entire cafeteria seemed to shift. Tables and chairs began to rattle, and the floor beneath them started to ripple like water disturbed by a stone. The lights flickered on and off, as if someone had just tweaked the laws of physics in the room. Rick, what did you do? Luna yelled from across the room, now standing up as the chaos unfolded. Rick, totally oblivious to the fact that he had just caused an interdimensional disaster, smiled proudly. See, Luna, this is the power of the galactic handshake. But then, The cafeteria door slammed open, and a teacher rushed in, looking extremely alarmed. "What in the world is going on in here?" she shouted, looking at the no-wobbling floor and the students frozen in panic. "Rick, what did you do?" Luna, shaking her head with an amused smile, whispered to herself, "This is going to be good." Rick's face fell as he realized that perhaps his handshake wasn't quite as effective as he thought. Luna was having the time of her life, watching Rick try to fix the mess he'd made. The lunch line had turned into a total disaster, with people now floating in the air, courtesy of Rick's accidental interdimensional handshake. Luna walked over to him, giving him a smirk. "Well, Rick," she said, "I guess you should have skipped the galactic handshake and just tried a normal one. I think you just tore a hole in the fabric of reality, again." Rick stood there, sheepishly rubbing the back of his head. "I think I might need to rethink this whole friendship thing." By now, Rick had started to feel a little more comfortable around Luna. The two of them had formed a strange sort of friendship, though Rick still had no idea what being human actually entailed. Luna had made it clear she was willing to guide him through this strange new world, though her guidance was more about making fun of him than actually helping. Rick, in his typical alien ignorance, continued to think that he was adapting well, but his attempts to blend in were, as always, a little more disastrous than he realized. One morning, as Rick and Luna entered the classroom, Rick took it upon himself to greet everyone. He had been practicing his human greeting all night, remembering to say the word hello at the proper time. As he stood by the door, he smiled, giddy with excitement, and loudly proclaimed, "Good day, fellow Earthlings." He was trying to be friendly. He really was. But the problem was that Rick had forgotten one small detail. Humans had a very specific way of greeting each other. What he didn't know was that "good day, fellow Earthlings" was the greeting of an alien, not a friendly student. Luna, sitting at her desk, face-palmed. She could already tell where this was going. The rest of the class didn't even flinch when Rick's greeting echoed across the room. But when the teacher, Miss Hawkins, looked up and heard Rick, she froze for a second. She wasn't sure if it was the awkwardness or the inappropriateness of the greeting that made her stop. But before she could respond, something completely unexpected happened. As Ms. Hawkins opened her mouth to say, "Hello, Rick," something strange occurred. A ripple passed through the air. Luna saw it first, and she blinked in confusion. The teacher's words seemed to rewind. Her mouth moved back, and the exact same words came out, but this time, 10 seconds earlier. "Hello, Rick," Miss Hawkins repeated. It wasn't just a slip of the tongue. It was like she had just rewound time. Luna quickly glanced around, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Was she imagining it? Then, it happened again. Rick smiled broadly, and the teacher, once again, opened her mouth to speak. "Hello, Rick." Boom. Time reset. Luna's mind raced. What the heck? Did I just see that? Did time rewind? She whispered, eyes wide with confusion. The entire class noticed now. People began muttering in confusion, wondering if the entire class had entered some time loop. Rick stood there, completely oblivious, grinning from ear to ear. "Hello, fellow students," he shouted again, oblivious to the fact that Ms. Hawkins, for the third time, was about to repeat herself. And sure enough, when she opened her mouth, she again said, "Hello, Rick." Luna couldn't help herself. She had been having fun with Rick's confusion, but this was starting to get out of hand. The teacher didn't seem to notice the time loops, but the students did. Everyone was staring at the clock, which seemed to flicker and jump forward and back. Every time Rick greeted someone, it triggered a time distortion. It was like a broken record, skipping 10 seconds back. Luna had to step in, shaking her head in disbelief. "Okay, Rick," she said, walking over to him with a half smile. "You know what? You've got something special. You just don't get the whole human greeting thing, do you?" Rick looked at her, a little embarrassed now. "What did I do wrong?" he asked, his tone completely genuine. Luna bit her lip to suppress a laugh. "You didn't greet them the right way. Humans don't say good day, fellow Earthlings. You just say hi or hello and then move on. Simple stuff, you know. You don't need to bend time." Rick looked puzzled. "But I thought that a proper greeting would require spatial acknowledgement. I've read that humans like formalities." Luna shook her head. "Yeah, formalities are nice, but we don't need to start warping the space-time continuum just to say hi. Just, you know, say hello like everyone else." At this point, Luna realized just how far off Rick was from understanding basic human interactions. He didn't know how to greet anyone, didn't understand how the flow of conversation worked, and somehow had managed to mess with time just by trying to fit in. Her amusement only grew as she watched Rick struggle with things that were second nature to her. But this time-looping incident had given her the perfect opportunity to confront Rick head-on. She was already half sure of what he was, but this was the final straw. As Rick tried to go back to his seat, Luna leaned over and whispered in his ear, loud enough for him to hear, but quiet enough for others to stay clueless. "Okay, Rick," she said with a smirk. "I've figured you out. You're not a human, are you? You're an alien trying to understand us, aren't you? I mean, come on. You're basically rewriting time because you can't even say hello, right?" Rick froze in place. His eyes widened as if he had just been caught doing something incredibly obvious. He tried to cover it up, but his awkward hesitation only gave him away. No, I'm just, new here. I'm still trying to get the whole greeting thing down. You know, humans and their weird customs." Luna couldn't hold back a laugh, shaking her head. "Right, you're an alien, Rick, and the fun's just beginning." As time went on, Rick began to adapt to the human world. Well, at least, that was his intention. Every day he tried a little harder to fit in, but it never went the way he thought it would. Human customs, like basic conversation and social cues, were as mysterious to him as the dark side of the moon. Still, he was determined to understand it all, even if it meant making himself look like an intergalactic fool in the process. One afternoon, in psychology class, the topic was emotions. The teacher, Ms. Jensen, asked the students to discuss what they understood about love and friendship. It was a simple, human exercise and opportunity for everyone to talk about feelings and connections. Luna rolled her eyes, half expecting Rick to make a disaster of it, but she didn't realize how bad it could get. Rick, sitting up straighter than usual, eagerly raised his hand. "I can explain love scientifically," he declared, a little too loudly for someone who had just learned what the word meant in the context of Earth. Miss Jensen hesitated, giving him a wary glance, but nodded for him to speak. Rick stood up, looking intensely serious, as though he was about to give a lecture at an intergalactic symposium. Love is a complex biochemical reaction in the brain, triggered by certain hormonal responses. It can be measured through neurotransmitter activity and quantified with mathematical precision. In fact, he continued, "I've been using my own devices to analyze love at a molecular level." Before anyone could respond, Rick flicked his wrist, and a hologram appeared in front of the class, showing a series of floating equations and colorful graphs. He started narrating, his voice taking on a clinical tone, completely missing the fact that his audience was now visibly uncomfortable. "This is a representation of love based on the interactions between serotonin and dopamine. As you can see, the peaks correspond to moments of intense emotional engagement, while the valleys indicate more subdued phases of attachment. Now, let's compare this to the friendship model. He flicked his wrist again, and suddenly, more holograms appeared, showing intertwining graphs of serotonin and oxytocin. Luna couldn't help but watch with a mix of amusement and disbelief. Rick had turned an emotionally sensitive subject into a scientific lecture that not even the most experienced psychologists would dare attempt in such a setting. The rest of the class was frozen, unsure of whether to laugh or run for cover. Ms. Jensen's face was a perfect combination of confusion and dread. Rick, I think we were hoping for something more, personal, you know, like how you feel about friendship or love. Rick blinked, utterly perplexed by the suggestion. But I am explaining how it works on a molecular level, Ms. Jensen. It's objective. This is far more precise than mere human interpretation. If you would like, I can demonstrate the actual neural activity behind emotional bonds, but I'd need to take scans of everyone here. And that might take Ms. Jensen cut him off before the entire class turned into guinea pigs for Rick's biological love experiment. That's okay, Rick. I think we get the idea. After class, Luna couldn't hold back anymore. Rick had gotten everything so wrong, it was almost impressive. As they walked down the hall, Luna leaned in close, trying not to burst into laughter. Well, that was something, wasn't it? Rick looked at her, genuinely confused. I don't understand. I explained love and friendship in the most accurate way possible. Why didn't they understand? Luna shook her head, a smirk creeping across her face. Yeah, you did that all right. But here's the thing. Rick, humans don't need equations to understand love. They just feel it. You know, like when you hug someone, or tell them you like them, or just hang out together. It's not about graphs and charts. Rick's eyes lit up, as if a whole new universe of possibilities had just opened up to him. Hugging, you say? But why does it not require a neurochemical explanation? He seemed genuinely eager to know, like the idea of hugging was some kind of mystical human power. Luna was exhausted by now. Trust me, Rick, it's much simpler than that. Hugging just means you care. It's a human thing. You don't need to measure everything. Rick seemed to think this over for a moment before nodding thoughtfully. I see. Maybe I can try hugging someone to gather some data on it. Luna immediately held up a hand. No more scientific analysis of physical affection, okay? Later that day, during lunch, Rick decided to put his new knowledge to the test. He approached one of the other students, a girl named Sophie, who was eating her sandwich. Rick stood next to her and stared at her for a moment, thinking. Then, with no warning, he leaned over, his arms outstretched, and hugged her. Sophie jumped in surprise, her sandwich flying out of her hand. What the Rick? What are you doing? Rick, with a serious look on his face, nodded in approval. I am attempting to understand the human concept of affection through physical contact. Does this convey the correct emotional message? Sophie stood there, frozen, unsure of how to respond to this alien hugging attempt. RHH, what? Luna, sitting at another table, almost spit out her drink from laughing. Well, Rick, she called across the room, that's one way to test it out. Rick smiled proudly and nodded again, still completely unaware of the confusion he had caused. I believe I now understand the importance of hugging in human culture. The entire cafeteria was now looking at Rick and Sophie. As the chaos of the situation unfolded, Luna couldn't help but think, This was going to be even more fun than she had anticipated. Rick, for all his alien logic, still couldn't understand the simplicity of human emotions. He thought the best way to understand was to break everything down into scientific terms. The result was nothing short of ridiculous. Luna couldn't wait to see what kind of disaster he'd get himself into next. As the class ended, she leaned back in her seat, wondering just how much longer she could keep the alien ruse going before Rick finally figured out that he wasn't fooling anyone except himself. It was the night of the school dance, and everyone was excited. The lights were low, the music was blasting, and students were scattered across the gym, laughing and dancing. Luna, of course, was with her friends, but she kept an eye on Rick. He had been getting better at blending in well, sort of. At least now, he could attempt to converse without causing a time loop or a gravitational collapse. But tonight was different. Tonight, Rick had decided that it was time to understand yet another part of human behavior. Dancing, Luna had told him, "Hey, just move your feet and sway to the music. It's simple." But of course, Rick wasn't going to take anything simple. No, he needed to understand dancing in the most scientifically accurate way possible. And that meant bringing his own unique brand of chaos to the dance floor. As he entered the dance floor, he was dressed in his usual awkwardness, standing straight with his arms at his sides. He looked more like someone who had never seen music in his life than someone who was about to try to dance. Luna sighed, knowing what was coming. She wasn't sure whether to be worried or entertained. She chose the latter. As Rick stood there for a moment, he looked around, analyzing the way the other kids were moving. Their limbs were flailing around in a strange rhythm that made absolutely no sense to him. He looked at the nearest couple trying to slow dance and concluded, "Ah, I see. Rapid oscillations in the limbs and synchronized movement patterns. This is just another form of gravitational force adjustment, right?" With that flawless logic in mind, he began to move. The first few seconds of Rick's dancing were relatively harmless, if not awkward. He swayed left to right, but it quickly became apparent that he wasn't dancing to the rhythm. Oh no, Rick was calculating, his movements sharp and deliberate, too deliberate. Every time he swung his arm, a strange ripple ran through the air, and small distortions began to appear around him. The lights in the gym flickered as Rick took his first spin. Then, as he continued his motions, they started to glow brightly, almost erratically, as if they had been plugged into an alien power source. The crowd around him didn't notice yet, too busy lost in their own fun, but Luna could already see the warning signs. Rick wasn't just dancing, he was bending reality around him. Each small shift of his body caused an energy wave to ripple outward. The first major sign that something was wrong came when Rick twisted to the beat, and the floor under his feet cracked. A small black hole opened up beneath him for half a second before closing. It was as if time and space were simply bending to his will with each movement. Luna's eyes widened. She immediately jumped back, pulling her friends away from the center of the dance floor. "Oh no, 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 no," she muttered under her breath. But it was already too late. As Rick's movements became more enthusiastic, the distortions escalated. The lights went haywire, flashing and blinking uncontrollably, shifting colors as if they were being pulled through some wormhole. The music didn't help either. The once thumping bass now sounded like it was being scrambled by a broken radio, growing distorted, out of sync with the crowd. Luna's friends started to notice the oddities. One of them yelled, "What's happening with the lights?" The floor shook, and someone screamed, "The floors, it's what is that?" The balloons hanging from the ceiling were sucked upward, floating towards an invisible vortex in the air. As they reached the ceiling, they disappeared into thin air, as if they had been pulled into another dimension. The crowd began to panic, realizing that they weren't just having a weird dance-off, things were getting out of control. Students started running in all directions, shouting in confusion. "What's going on?" One girl grabbed her friend's hand and pulled her toward the exit. "Get out, now." Luna, who had been watching all of this with horrified amusement, couldn't stop herself from laughing. She had tried to warn Rick, but it was too late now. The gym was practically coming apart at the seams, and Rick poor. Clueless Rick was still in the middle of the chaos, enjoying himself as though everything was normal. Luna walked over to him, shaking her head. "Rick, what the hell are you doing?" Rick smiled at her, his face bright with pride. "I'm dancing. I'm getting the humans to understand cosmic rhythm through the power of motion and energy. Isn't this fun?" Luna put her hands on her hips, staring at him with a mix of exasperation and amusement. "Fun? You're tearing apart reality, Rick. You can't just dance like that. You're creating black holes and dimensional rifts." Rick looked at her, still not fully understanding what was happening. "But I thought that dancing was supposed to have energy, and the energy just happens to be interdimensional." "I wasn't trying to." Luna didn't let him finish. "Stop," she shouted, grabbing his arm. "You need to calm down before you send us all to another dimension." Rick seemed to realize, albeit too late, that he might have overdone it. He stood still for a second, trying to figure out how to reverse the damage he'd caused. The energy in the room was still fluctuating, and everything was vibrating at odd frequencies. Luna, now seriously worried, pulled Rick out of the center of the dance floor. "I think you need to stop dancing for a while and let the universe catch up with your interdimensional moves." Rick, finally realizing that something was terribly wrong, nodded sheepishly. "I'll try to contain my cosmic energies next time." As the gym slowly started to return to normal, Luna couldn't help but laugh. Of course, Rick would find a way to cause a cosmic disaster just by trying to have a little fun. But, deep down, Luna had to admit, it was never boring with Rick around. The chaos from the school dance had barely settled, but the damage was done. Students were still talking about the strange happenings, with some convinced they'd witnessed a cosmic rift or some sort of dimensional rupture. Luna, however, was thoroughly entertained. The energy distortions, the disappearing balloons, the lights flickering like they were in a disco from another galaxy, it was all a bit much. But then again, it was just another Tuesday with Rick. As the dust settled, Luna walked over to Rick, who was still standing in the middle of the now mostly normal gym, looking rather pleased with himself. He was running his hands over his clothes, seemingly trying to smooth out the wrinkles in the fabric of reality itself. Luna couldn't resist any longer. "All right, Rick," Luna said, crossing her arms and giving him the side eye. "I think we need to talk." Rick blinked at her, clearly unaware that she had been waiting for this moment. "Talk? What about? I thought the dance went great. You saw how much energy I brought to the party, right?" Luna gave him a dry stare. "Oh, I saw everything. The interdimensional black holes, the reality warping dance moves, the entire gym nearly collapsing because you can't just move your feet like a normal person." Rick's eyes widened, his smile faltering. "Wait, you mean you knew this whole time that I wasn't?" Luna interrupted him, raising an eyebrow. "Rick, I've known since the first day. Who else could create so much cosmic chaos and still think they were doing something good? Seriously, who else but an alien could screw up something as simple as dancing and turn it into a dimensional catastrophe?" Rick looked slightly panicked, his posture straightening. I didn't mean to cause so much trouble. I thought dancing was supposed to be about energy, about feeling the rhythm, but then things started happening that I couldn't control. I wasn't trying to destroy anything, I was just experimenting. Luna leaned in, giving him a sarcastic smile. Oh, so you were just experimenting, huh? That's what you do when you're an alien and you don't know what the heck a dance is, right? You break space-time for fun. Rick opened his mouth to respond, but Luna held up her hand to stop him. No need to explain. I get it now. You're not from around here, and you're just trying to study humans. Which brings me to the point where I finally figured you out. You're not a weird new student. You're an alien, sent here to observe us. And, guess what? You suck at it. Rick looked taken aback. Suck at it? He blinked, realizing the truth of what she said. Okay, maybe I'm not doing too well, but my mission is important. My people sent me to learn about your kind, to observe your emotions, your behaviors, your society. I need this data to help my species understand yours. It's critical. Luna narrowed her eyes, giving him a long, skeptical look. Critical. You can barely figure out how to say hello without creating a time loop. Rick, I'm not sure how much data you're collecting when you're causing chaos wherever you go. Rick, now growing a little defensive, crossed his arms. I'm doing my best. It's not easy understanding humans when everything you do seems to be wrong. I thought I had it all figured out, but Luna smirked. Yeah, you thought. But you didn't. And honestly, Rick, you're in way over your head. You need to stop trying to fix things with science, and maybe just try to fit in. Rick hesitated for a moment, his expression shifting from defensive to confused. But I don't know how. Everything I do just makes things worse. Luna's smirk faded slightly, and she stepped forward, her tone becoming more serious. All right, I've got an idea. Since you're so desperate to be helpful, why don't you help fix the mess you made at the dance? You know, like actually help. But this time, try not to tear apart the fabric of reality while doing it. Rick's face lit up, though he seemed reluctant to acknowledge that he had caused the chaos. You mean? Help clean up the mess. With my alien powers, Luna raised an eyebrow. Sure. You can clean it up with your alien powers, but maybe this time, try using your head instead of accidentally opening black holes. And no more weird time-warping handshakes. Rick nodded eagerly, still not entirely understanding the magnitude of the situation. Okay, I can do that. Fixing the dance sounds like the perfect opportunity to prove my worth. As Rick began to step toward the center of the gym, he raised his hands dramatically, ready to fix everything. But his approach was still completely off. Rather than using his newfound cosmic abilities wisely, Rick started by creating yet another dimensional anomaly, trying to stabilize the gym with random energy pulses. This caused the lights to flicker again, only this time, they blinked in strange sequences. Some lights went blue, others green, and then there were a few lights that flickered out of existence completely, as though they had been pulled into a parallel universe. Luna, watching from the sidelines, had to stifle a laugh as Rick frantically tried to reverse what he'd just done. He looked around, trying to control the situation, but it only made things worse. A small black hole formed in the corner of the gym, and suddenly, the tables and chairs began floating into the air like they were caught in a gravitational wave. The snack table wobbled, and the punch bowl began to float upwards, spilling its contents everywhere. Luna threw her hands up in defeat. Rick, I told you to stop. But Rick, still trying his best, gave her a look of determination. I'm fixing it. Just give me a second. I just need to reconfigure the energy flow and readjust the spatial vectors. Luna rolled her eyes. "You're doing the opposite of fixing it, Rick." Despite all of Rick's interdimensional disasters, Luna eventually stepped in, using her own quick thinking to calm the situation. She ran over to Rick, grabbed him by the arm, and pulled him out of the center of the chaos. "Enough," she said firmly. Let's get out of here before you make a hole in the space-time continuum again." Rick stood there, panting and bewildered. "I'm sorry, I just wanted to help." Luna gave him a half smile. "Well, Rick, you certainly helped make the party memorable. If by memorable you mean utterly disastrous." After the chaos of the school dance and the mess that Rick had caused, the gym was still a disaster. But oddly enough, things started to calm down a little. Rick, ever the optimist, had made one final attempt to fix everything by opening a giant interdimensional portal. This, of course, was meant to reverse all the damage he had done and return everything back to normal. But true to Rick's nature, the solution was just as disastrous as the problem. He stood in the center of the gym, eyes squinting in concentration, his arms raised like he was summoning the stars. "All right, I've got it," Rick announced, his voice filled with confidence. "I'll just open a portal that will realign everything, restoring the temporal fabric of this space." As Rick began to manipulate the cosmic energies around him, a massive, swirling portal opened right in front of him. The light from the portal pulsed in bizarre colors, creating a distorted halo that seemed to warp everything it touched. Suddenly, the gym was filled with swirling patterns, as if reality itself was being pulled into the vortex. Desks, chairs, and even the walls began to disappear, replaced by bizarre alien landscapes and floating objects. Luna, standing at the back of the room, rolled her eyes. The familiar scene unfolded once again. Rick, in his infinite wisdom, had once again turned a simple problem into an interdimensional nightmare. She watched, arms crossed, as the gym transformed into a cosmic ruin. The ground beneath her feet started to disintegrate, revealing glimpses of another dimension, filled with strange floating objects and sparkling, unidentifiable shapes. The air felt thick with cosmic energy, and Luna couldn't help but feel like she was watching a freak show from another galaxy. Rick stood proudly, clearly pleased with himself. "There," he said with a grin. "The problem is fixed. We've got a beautiful new reality here, a bit more interdimensional than before, but I'm sure it'll settle down soon." Luna sighed deeply, exhausted from the continuous absurdity. She glanced over at Rick, his face glowing with excitement and utter cluelessness. "Well, at least you tried," she said, sarcasm dripping from her words. "Or maybe you didn't." Rick, completely unaware of the mess he had just caused, tilted his head in confusion. "What do you mean? I did it. I fixed everything. I just needed to adjust the dimensional fluxes, and now everything's fine." "Fine," Luna replied with a mock expression of awe. "Yeah, it's just perfect. I'm sure the school board will be thrilled with your new interdimensional space-time makeover. We've got alien landscapes where the lockers used to be, floating desks in place of classrooms. What more could we ask for?" Rick looked around, still trying to understand what was wrong. "It'll all stabilize soon, trust me," he insisted, waving his hands as if the entire cosmic situation could be fixed by a wave. Luna, now completely bored with the situation, leaned against the nearest floating desk and sighed. "Right, sure, stabilize. Just like the last time you accidentally broke reality, huh?" Rick was still trying to explain himself, but his words were starting to fall apart. I didn't mean for the school to, well, become a cosmic rift. But you know, I had to use all the spatial dimensions, to realign the energies. You can't just rearrange space without a little bit of chaos. Luna raised an eyebrow. Oh, right. So the whole place is now a cosmic ruin because you had to realign energy. Makes total sense. She paused and looked around at the chaotic scenery. By the way, how are we going to explain all of this to the principal? Rick stared at her blankly, his face full of genuine confusion. Oh, I didn't think of that. I guess I can just... Luna interrupted him, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Yeah, maybe you should explain to them how a 12-year-old alien turned the school gym into a cosmic disaster zone. That should go over well. Rick scratched his head, completely unsure of how to fix this. Well, I can just use another portal to, reverse the changes. Luna shook her head. Please don't. We've had enough of your portals, Rick. I just want to go home, where reality actually makes sense for once. As the interdimensional rift continued to shift and warp around them, Luna could only look at Rick with a smirk, knowing full well that he'd never truly understand the human world. It was like trying to explain life to an alien who had no idea what a sandwich was, let alone how to dance or make friends. In the distance, she saw a few students trying to shrink away from the floating debris and alien anomalies, desperately trying to salvage what little of the school was left intact. Luna couldn't help but shake her head and laugh at the absurdity of it all. Rick, looking completely defeated, turned to her. You know, Luna, I just wanted to help. I was trying to, yeah, I know, Luna said, cutting him off. I know. But this is what happens when you try to be human, Rick. Rick, still unaware of how deeply he'd messed up, gave a half-hearted shrug. I guess I'm still learning, huh? Luna gave him one last ironic smile before the scene cut to black, leaving Rick floating in a chaotic mix of dimensions, while Luna's voice echoed in the distance. Yeah, Rick, you're still learning, and I'm just here to enjoy the ride.